Atmosfear by Nobody. Chapter 3 The Perilous Road to Kindia. I woke up to the sweltering heat of morning that wrapped around me like a plastic gurney through my dreamless heavy sleep. I was drenched in sweat, and so the cold shower felt extremely refreshing. Also, my stomach was getting very active from eating that spicy dish the previous day, but I welcomed this change in my metabolism. Back in Finland, I was always tormented by constipation, as if my whole body was rebelling against being stuck there. Feeling fresh and clean, I went outside to the courtyard, where I found my traveling partner speaking heatedly on the phone. The conversation was carried out in Susu, one of the many tribal languages of Guinea, so I wasn't able to catch any of it, except that it probably wasn't very cordial. "Oh, shit," Mohammed grumbled as he finally finished the call. "This guy is killing me now." "What is it?" I asked, as I walked over to a chair under the shade of the mango tree. Wary of roasting myself under the merciless sun, I made sure to keep out of its rays before I would attain my precious sun cream. Meanwhile, Mohammed sat crouched in front of a hollow concrete block that served as a makeshift fireplace for embers. On top of it was a small iron pan full of water that was now boiling away. "You want coffee?" he asked, and brought the pan over to the table, on which were laid a couple of white baguettes, some unopened cans of sardines, as well as whole fresh onions. A strange culinary combination to my eyes. "Sure," I said, reaching for a cup. "So, what guy is killing you now?" "Well, shit. It's just some little things. Commando doesn't answer now. Yesterday he say he gonna take us to Yusuf place today. But I know he's acting crazy stupid now." "Why is that?" "Because," my friend sighed, "I forget to give him money yesterday. For driving us like that all day, you know. I mean, I give him like 5,000 franc Guinea for gasoline. But I know it's not enough. I just forget that time. Man, he helped us so much." "Okay," I said, and tried to shoo away the little ducklings that were pecking at my toes while hunting for breadcrumbs. Our host, Kanja, came over as well, and while my partner was taking a shower, I asked him, "By the way, how much is €1 in franc Guinea?" I think now €1 is about something like 11,000 franc Guinea." "Thanks," I said. "Wow, this money's so inflated, man. It's like you have to carry a whole bag of it just to buy one beer." "I know, brother. It's fucked up. France did that too, you know." "How?" I asked. "Is it like in Senegal, where France prints all their paper money and then sells it to them? And they take a percentage of all trade deals like some fucking mafia. Or at least, that's what I heard from an imam back in Finland." "Not like that. Guinea prints its own money, but when we got our independence, France printed their own fake money, and they sent it here, so that our own money wouldn't have any value anymore. You know? That shit destroyed our economy." "Damn," I said, feeling a bit dubious about this piece of news. But then again, having heard so many horror stories about the colonial powers, it felt like nothing seemed too extreme for them when trying to bind down their vassals. At this point, my partner's phone rang on the table. He ran out of the shower with a towel around him and looked at the phone screen with a smile. "Ah, yeah," he said. "Now it's Commando." He had a bit of explaining to do and then ended the call jubilantly. Okay, he said. He's coming now. We can go to Yusuf's place after all. I let out a sigh of relief, realizing that we wouldn't have to resort to those perilous moto taxis, at least this time around. You know, in this country, my partner explained to me as we finished our humble breakfast and then washed our dishes underneath a fosse that was fixed into one of the walls. Everybody think if you go to Europe, right away you get super rich. They squeeze you like hell all the time. Money, 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 money. Damn, I said. I feel you, man. Having known quite a few African expats in Finland, I had discovered how hard it was for them to get by. Europe certainly hadn't turned out to be the El Dorado they had been expecting. The rents were high, food was expensive, and decent jobs were scarce. Without first learning the Finnish language and then getting a diploma from a Finnish school, these guys could barely sustain themselves from day to day, let alone provide for the family back home. But few people back in Africa would believe any of this. Europe had to be a paradise because it gave them a hopeful idea to pursue in their poverty. If someone who had really experienced the harsh reality of Europe would try to contradict that illusion, they would be called a liar who just wanted to keep more of those riches for themselves. Who is this Yusuf we're going to visit today? I asked while we placed the clean dishes to dry in the sunlight. He's my brother, my partner said proudly. He is one fucking amazing guitarist. You will see. I can't wait for that. And then, after we leave from there, do we go straight to Kindia? That's right. So we have to take everything we need from here, okay? We're gonna stay there in Kindia for a couple of weeks at least and practice for studio. You can leave things like your winter jacket here with Kanja. Our host agreed to keep some of my things safe and was also kind enough to offer me his slippers. The man was a saint. They were a welcomed present, compared to my own thick winter boots that would have melted my feet into a pudding very quickly. Eventually, Commando arrived with Abdu, and then we were off jumbling away on the surreal rocky paths and, after that, back on the tumultuous main highway. The daytime life seemed just as hectic as the night had been, with even more vehicles and pedestrians bustling about their daily business, or then just loitering about. Some of these people were dressed to kill, with colorful, stylishly traditional vestments, while others looked like they owned nothing but the one ragged t-shirt they were wearing. Many of them carried heavy loads of goods on top of their heads, fashioned together with ropes or then stacked into large boxes that seemed to teeter out of balance at any moment, without ever doing so. Gradually, the number of buildings by the roadside decreased as we drove further away into the suburbs. I could spot brilliant alabaster white mosques from which prayer calls were being broadcast with something that sounded like massive bullhorns. The call was always given by a single male alto voice, Allahu Akbar, laden with exotic microtonalities that resonated far and wide over the noise of the traffic. It's beautiful, I told my partner. Yeah, man. Better than church bells in Finland? Way better. After some time, we exited the main road into another crater-like little path, and I could hear how the undercarriage of the car was being viciously scraped by the sharp points of orange-hued rock beneath us. But Commando seemed unfazed by this ruination to his car. In fact, he drove us all the way to Yusuf's house, next to a wide, sand-covered yard that was teeming with people. This bright, open space was shared with many houses around it in what turned out to be a neat little neighborhood. In the middle of this lively community was a cement well from which the townspeople drew water with a plastic jerry can that was tied to a rope. People turned to observe our arrival, since cars seemed to be a rare sight around these parts. When the children saw me get out of the car, they laughingly pointed their fingers and squealed in unison, "Forte! Forte!" I greeted them back, not disturbed by all this attention, as it was so jovial. Meanwhile, my friends drew plastic garden chairs to sit in the shade of a small, solitary tree that had been planted next to the porch of Yusuf's house. The house itself was whitewashed and well maintained, with a low, even porch that was decorated with colorful pieces of ceramics and sheltered from the sun with a sturdy sheet iron roof. To my surprise, there were no actual doors in the building, but only silk curtains that had been drawn in front of the doorways. "Tom," my partner said, "get a chair from there." "Yeah," I answered, while taking in the scenery and basking a moment in the sunlight before it would start to burn my face. After having stared at me to their satisfaction, the children engaged in some sort of a ball-throwing game in the middle of the courtyard. Some of the group stood on guard, while the others were gathered in a loose circle around them, trying to hit them with a soft, ragged tennis ball. This healthy form of pastime was a far cry from the expensive plastic and electronic toys that we Finnish kids were used to hoarding, always begging for new ones to replace the old. Before I could move to reach for a chair, a sweet young girl of 10 had run over and then carried it to me with an adorable air of seriousness. Mohammed came over to hug her affectionately. "This is my daughter," he said proudly, while turning towards me with her hanging in the air, safe in his muscular arms. "Hello," I said, and took her little hand. "How are you?" "Hello, I'm fine, thank you," she retorted politely, her eyes cast down with shyness. "How are you?" Yusuf himself came over, dressed in colorful, loose traditional shirt and pants. He seemed like a serious-looking man compared to his older brother, who was always cracking jokes and sending his listeners to bursts of laughter. But he too shook my hand and said pleasantly, "You are welcome here in Guinea. Happy arrival." "This guy," Mohammed said, and patted his shoulder with reverence. "He is one great guitar player, Tom. Everyone know Yusuf here. The master!" While the men were lounging on the chairs and talking, the women were preparing the food in large metal pots that were laid out over open fires. They also came over to greet me while changing a word or two with the men, accompanied sometimes by a joke that made everyone laugh and throw back one retort after the other. All of which, to my regret, I couldn't understand, since they preferred their own tribal language over French. I noticed that certain things like numbers and dates were indeed expressed in French during the conversation, as these had presumably been introduced into the society by the former colonial power. While listening to this undecipherable talk, I received a small sealed plastic pouch of water from one of the children, a comically serious looking little chap. He used this opportunity to feel the skin of my arm with his fingers. He was not only interested in the color of my skin, but he seemed especially intrigued by the black ink tattoos that ran around both of my arms. At first he only touched them quickly, but when he saw me smiling, he was emboldened enough to run his forefinger along them to see if the color would come off. After noticing that this was not the case, he broke into a smile and ran over to the other children to explain his discovery. What's this?" I asked, as I held the transparent bag of water in my hand. "Water for drink," my partner explained, and accepted one from a little girl who also reached out and felt my arm with a shy smile on her face. "Look, man," Mohammed said, biting a corner of the sachet and raising it to his mouth. "You bite it like this, and then you just suck it." All the other guys indulged in this form of refreshment as well. On each bag was printed the logo of its manufacturer, which, unsurprisingly, turned out to be a French company stationed in Guinea. I tried to follow suit, but, being unacquainted with the method, spilled a decent part of it upon my person. The others poked at each other and smirked at my fumblings, but Mohammed was supportive as always. "That's okay, man. You learn soon." "It's so weird to drink water like this," I mumbled, "but it does take less plastic to make than bottles would, right?" "That is why, you know. In here, we don't do any recycling our shit, so..." He was interrupted by a lady in a bright blue skirt and a perfectly matching headdress, who brought over a huge plate that was piled with steaming rice, meat, and chili sauce. This delicious sight was accompanied by a stack of big metal spoons. "Smells great," I said. "What meat is this?" "It's cow stomach," Yusuf responded. "Ooh, wow," I said, and glanced at my partner, who grinned and asked me, "You never eat that before?" No, but I've had haggis in Scotland, which is about the same thing. That was really good." "I'm telling you," he said, while digging into the big plate along with the others. "Start eating. It's good." It sure was. The stomach lining had been cut into thin, juicy strips that were soft to the teeth, but not at all mushy. It was fascinating how such seemingly unappetizing parts of the animal could be fashioned into a wonderful meal through the virtue of necessity. I broke into a mild sweat from the spiciness of the sauce, but there was plenty of white rice and vegetables to balance out the fresh chili. "Do you know what this is?" Mohammed asked, and picked up a white, cylinder-shaped piece of vegetable from the plate. "This is Guinean potato." "Really?" I said, hunting one for myself as well. "I thought it was maybe banana." "No, man, they grow like this, long, like carrot maybe, but we call it potato here." I found out that it also tasted like potato, but had more firm and yet creamy texture, rich in fiber like a pear almost, but not sweet at all. "Oh, so good," I attested with my mouth full. "Much better than Finnish potato. In fact, this food is better than anything I've had in Finland, except my mom's cooking." Eat, man," he urged me. "We have long trip today, I tell you. Next time we eat is gonna be long time from now." We soon finished the plate and thanked our kind hosts, who all wished us a safe journey to Kindia. Once we went back to Commando's car, we noticed a rank smell of petrol emanating from it. We got down on our bellies in order to have a look, to see if those sharp, scraping rocks had actually punctured the gas tank on the way. And indeed, my previous fears had come true. She was steadily leaking her life essence into the dust. There was nothing else to do but to get to the nearest repair shop as soon as possible while there was still gas left in the car. Upon inquiry from the locals, we thankfully found one nearby. This service station consisted of a small wooden shack on a sandy hilltop, with a motley herd of car wrecks parked around it, and a few guys sitting in the shade, kicking their sandaled heels. "Drive faster!" Abdu urged our driver, in his fear of having to push the car up the rest of the way. And so we swerved up the hillside with a wide, screeching turn. But at that moment, the employees who were sitting uphill began to scream at us and wave their hands frantically. "What the hell's wrong with them?" Commando grunted, but then realized that he was driving straight into a wide ditch that was in front of us. He hit the brakes and turned left in order to get on top of a narrow cement overpass. But he wasn't quite quick enough, and so we made it only with our left tire, while the right one went over its side. The undercarriage of the car rammed hard against it, which stopped us to a dead halt, and after this, we immediately felt it starting to topple over into the ditch. We were all screaming inside the car except Commando, the seasoned warrior, who kept his cool and put the gears on reverse. The faithful station wagon was thankfully rear-wheel driven, so with painful screeching it was able to pull us back to safe ground. But the violent maneuver had sent up large clouds of orange dust that covered our surroundings. So now, all of a sudden, we were going full reverse downhill into the congested driveway behind us without seeing anything. I could hear horns blazing all around as cars sped past us by a hair's breadth, while their drivers shouted at us through their open windows. After what seemed like forever, Commando was able to locate the brakes, and thus we ended in a quavering standstill until the dust finally settled. We found ourselves in the middle of the narrow road, with cars and motorbikes passing around us from both directions, accompanied by angry hand gestures and remonstrances. But once Commando put his head out of his window and the other drivers saw that he was a red beret, they immediately stopped their complaints and let us maneuver our car uphill undisturbed. "Come sit in the shade," Abdu advised me once we came to a stop next to the repair shop. He grabbed my guitar case and laptop bag from the trunk and said emphatically, "Don't ever leave your things unguarded here." "Thanks," I said. "I'm a little naive." I followed him over to a rough cement terrace at the side of the shack, sheltered from the afternoon sun with a sheet metal roof. There I took out my French books and kept practicing the language, in order to communicate better with these jovial, wonderfully sociable people. The repair operation wasn't easy, and promised to take quite a bit of time with the antediluvian tools that the mechanics had. First, they raised the front of the car up with a couple of squeaky hand pumps, and then crawled under it with cigarettes hanging from their mouths. "You want drink?" Mohammed asked, and handed me a second-hand plastic Coke bottle that was filled with some yellowish, partially frozen liquid. "Thanks," I said. What is this? Ginger, he replied, and pointed at a young woman who walked across the yard with a large plastic vat that was carefully balanced on top of her head. It was her portable kiosk, inside which were frozen water bags as well as a whole array of reused soda bottles, all filled with liquids of different colors. Careful, brother, Commando said and came over to observe my reaction to this new delicacy, clenching his fist dramatically. It's strong stuff. All right, I said, and opened the cap. The ice had partially melted, so I was able to squeeze some of the bright-colored liquid into my mouth. And surely enough, it felt like drinking battery acid. Oh, god damn, I groaned with a face that sent the guys laughing. Good shit, eh? Yusuf said, joining us by foot in order to observe the repairs after Mohammed had called him. After all, we hadn't made it too far from his house yet before this unlucky turn of events. In order to pass the time, I took out my guitar and played a bit, which drew the guys over to listen. Mohammed joined in to sing some of the songs we'd written together back in Finland. After a couple of these simple jingles, I gave the guitar to Yusuf. He asked for a guitar pick and began to play a fast-paced rhythm guitar pattern, interspersed by rapid melodic runs, as if he had two separate sets of hands. It was groovy as hell and seemed impossible for me to figure out. I couldn't even say where the first beat of the measure was, let alone try to follow his fingers as to which notes he was playing. Once Yusuf finished this stellar performance, I spent the rest of the waiting time wandering around the dusty hillside in the reclining evening sun, which no longer burned so fiercely behind the tall palm trees. While observing the bustling life of the street below us, I was also keeping an eye on any signs of political unrest. But, just like everywhere else we'd been thus far, people seemed to be focused on their everyday lives and on finishing the work at hand so as to make it home on time. No one seemed to flourish the bright red garments which had become the symbol of the opposition party. Relieved by this observation, I placed my hopes on the fact that perhaps the protests were confined to other regions in the city. Or perhaps everyone was only waiting for the 13th day of that month, which was said to be a day of nationwide resistance. I sure hoped that we were going to be out of town by that time. So what's the plan after we get this car fixed? I asked my partner as we sauntered in the large open space amidst the rusted, crippled car husks. Are we still going to try to make it to Kindia today? Yeah, man, he said, while kicking around with an empty plastic bottle like it was a football. But Commando tell me it's too late now for him to drive there, so we have to take taxi instead. That's all right, I said. Over there it must be pretty peaceful, huh? It's really cool, I tell you, he confirmed, while sending the bottle flying far downhill, almost hitting a passing motorcycle. Oops! No problem there. With all this politics bullshit. I really hope Commando is right, I said as we observed the mechanics reinstall the fuel tank, now fixed with welded metal patches. Right about what? Mohammed asked. What he said about all that crazy stuff that I read from the news, I said. That it's all just Western propaganda. Me too, my partner confessed, with much less assurance than the previous time we had discussed the subject. Yusuf remained with us to make sure that the car would finally get prepared, and then came over to wish us a safe journey once again. Commando then drove us to a busy street corner a few miles down the road. It was here that we would wait for the taxi that would get us to our final destination. My partner gave the man a hefty wad of bills and then told me, "He gonna wait with us here to see we get taxi. You wanna go out and smoke?" As we went to sit at a bench in front of a little stone kiosk, I asked Mohammed, "Did you pay him for the damage to his car as well?" "Yeah, man, a little bit. He was running all this shit for us, you know." But he made the choice to drive all the way down that crazy rocky road himself," I said, feeling silly for trying to argue him. "I know, but this is Africa, man. If I don't give him something, he never helped me again." "I see," I said. "Makes sense." "Yeah, man, in here people don't have so much things, so they have to share their shit to survive." And it makes life nicer," I responded. "I mean, you feel more togetherness. Finns have so much property, but they're still so goddamn stingy." "That's it," he said. "In there, you can't borrow 20 euro from someone without getting in trouble. Too much bala. Sitting on that wooden bench, we spent a full hour staring at the deafening noise and bustle of a Friday evening traffic. To add to the chaos, an old beat-up SUV gave up the ghost right in the middle of the road, which caused a huge uproar of horns blaring behind him. The driver, a wiry, traditionally clothed old man, jumped out and shouted for people to help him push the car to the side of the driveway. "I go help," my partner said, and went on with a couple of other guys to push at the front of the car, while the driver was bellowing orders at them to try harder, all the while forgetting to look behind him and actually steer the rolling car. "Oh, shit," I shouted when I noticed a police car coming up behind them. "Watch out for that cop car!" But it was too late. The rear bumper of the SUV banged heavily against the side of the white police pickup truck and came to a shuddering halt. "What's going on?" A well-built, athletic policeman in his 30s hollered in French while getting out of the truck. "Ooh, boy," I thought. They were in it for now. Had this been in Finland, they would definitely have to pay a hefty fine, so I was expecting at least that, as well as a bribe perhaps, having heard stories about corruption in the Guinean public sector. But I was mistaken. Instead of trying to explain himself in a civil fashion, the driver began to scream his head off at the officer and his partner, who both seemed to take this inexplicable abuse quite coolly. Luckily, the foaming went on only for a moment before Mohammed and other bystanders pulled the man away and shouted some sense into him. Instead of arresting this lunatic, the two officers only returned to their car and then drove off, laughing. I could barely believe my eyes. "Stupid motherfucker guy," my partner huffed as he returned to the bench where I had sat, marveling at the unfolding scene. "Getting into shit with police like that? Look!" He pointed at the driver, who was now back in his car, and for some insane reason let it roll right back into the same spot in the middle of the driveway, where the engine had died in the first place. And presto! Again he was blocking the road and causing helter-skelter. "What an idiot," I said, when we saw him wave his hand at us. "Look, he wants you to help him again." "No, fuck this idiot guy," my partner grumbled. "I'm not going there to sweat my ass again." So instead, we just sat and observed how the man, now completely forsaken by any outside help, hammered his horn and shouted obscenities at the world at large. Finally, a decades-old towing truck crawled over to rid us all of the car and its loony driver. "So," I asked, as the afternoon sun made its course over us and my buttocks were getting numb from all that sitting, "what is the plan exactly?" "We wait for my cousin," Mohammed explained. "He gonna take us there with taxi. Wait, I call him again." Soon enough, we spotted the long-awaited ride, which was another beat-up station wagon, but this one was miraculously fitted with seats for 9 people. 2 were squeezed together in the front, next to the driver, and there were 2 rows of seats behind it. On top of the car's roof was a net-covered mishmash of luggage that reached up to 9 feet like a massive ant heap on wheels. "Are we going to put my guitar up there?" I asked in horror. "No, man," Mohammed said. "We take it inside with us. Come on." He opened the door and I crawled into the middle row feeling relieved. But to my surprise, there was already a large middle-aged lady sitting at the other end of the seat. "Good day," I said, and she greeted me smilingly. Even when Mohammed instructed me to place my guitar case on top of her legs as well as my own, while squeezing himself right after me, she didn't seem to mind it. "I'm sorry about this," I said while pressed against her. "No problem," she said bravely, and did her best to allow myself to find a comfortable position. Unfortunately, this was not feasible. Mohammed has the physique of a bodybuilder, and his wide shoulders weighed on me mercilessly. Also, my head was hunkered down because of the low ceiling, and the large guitar case pressed against my chest like an anvil in that small, overpacked confinement. I thanked the heavens that I didn't suffer from claustrophobia. To make matters worse, it was Friday night, and it seemed like the whole of Conakry was escaping the city in one frantic battalion. We must have crawled about a foot per minute at best for over 2 hours. And as we were locked in our cramped positions, our bodies aching with numbing pain, we were constantly haggled by vendors who ran to our open windows and shouted from the top of their lungs in order to present their wares. Bread, water, soda, candy, fruit. "You have beer?" I pleaded them, but the answer was a shocked "No." "Boy," my partner said, turning his head to me and knocking me in the eye with the brim of his baseball cap, "this is Muslim country. They don't sell beer like that." "There's no beer in this whole damn country?" I inquired with horror. "There is beer, man. But you have to go to bar or gas station and things like that. And also," he added, lowering his voice, "you don't drink beer outside like this. People think bad with that shit." "All right," I sighed and had another sip of lukewarm water instead. "You wait," Mohammed promised me. "There is really nice beer, wine, whiskey, everything in Kindia. Tom is gonna fly soon and be happy." "Thank God," I said wistfully. The kind lady sitting next to me offered me some sugar-coated popcorn that she had bought from one of the vendors. I couldn't say no, even when I generally disliked sugar, since it was so unique to me that a complete stranger would be so kindly disposed toward myself. Back in Finland, people wouldn't even look at each other in the eye in the public transports, let alone talk or offer something to each other. I'd actually heard stories of well-intentioned immigrants shunned like lepers or criminals for trying to share their snacks with Finns during transit. Only during the weekends the buses and trains were lively in Finland, when the screeching drunk crowds raised hell for the whole week's worth in one vulgar, desperate effort to feel free and connect with each other. "Let's get bananas," my partner said as the car stopped next to a little wooden shack that stood quite alone by the roadside, surrounded by dark undergrowth and palm trees. The shop consisted of a long straw roof, from which hung bright electric light bulbs, and a tall set of shelves that were laden with neat rows of fruits. Mangoes, watermelons, oranges, bananas, you name it. They smelled wonderfully sweet and fresh, and had probably been picked during that very same day. As we pulled to a halt, we were immediately surrounded by the female vendors who, upon seeing a European emerge from the vehicle, wanted to sell me every possible thing at hand. I refused politely, letting my partner do the bidding as he knew best, and only marveled at the rich colors and shapes of all the paradisiacal fruits on display. I had never seen such a glorious collection of nature's delectables before. In Finland, you couldn't grow much more than potatoes and apples, and the rest of the fruits came in from around the world, looking and tasting like mere shadows of their original form. Mohammed and the other passengers finished buying what they wanted and began to squeeze themselves back into that hellish car, after having had only a short break to stretch their backs and legs. And so we continued again. Just when I thought I was going to lose my mind in that snail-like crawl within the legions of horn-bellowing cars and smoking trucks, suddenly the traffic inferno cleared, and we were finally off the main road, on our way to the countryside. "Now you see," my partner shouted while suppressing a yawn, barely able to keep his eyes open after a long day of stress and hustling to get us on the road. "This is where we start ruling." "Yeah," I shouted over the general chatter of the passengers that had flared up again after the external noise of engines had subsided. Once again I could feel fresh wind blowing through the open windows. Above us was a clear dark blue sky, with the last rays of sunlight gleaming behind a green wall of trees to our right. "We start to go to jungle fast now," Mohammed said. "You see?" "Can't wait for it," I said, and tried to stretch my aching neck in order to look outside through the window, but I couldn't see much at all with him sitting on my right and the elderly lady bouncing about on my left side. "Listen," I pleaded, "could I sit there by the window after the next break? I'm totally broken here in the middle, dude." "No problem," he answered with an emphatic nod. "We're gonna stop soon. I know this way from here. The driver always stop in one restaurant here." "Oh," I said with a grumbling stomach. "Can we get something to eat there?" "Of course," he said, offering me another one of the small bananas that tasted very sweet and rich. "Take more, man. Throw that shit outside," he said, pointing at the peels I'd collected in my hand. I did as he instructed, like all the other passengers seemed to do with their trash, plastic or biodegradable. The roadside had to look pretty disgusting if all the people traveling through it followed the same manner. The evening grew dark soon after the sun disappeared into a dull purple haze, and I was expectantly gazing through the car window from my cramped place in order to catch a glimpse of the promised restaurant. By this time there was almost nothing but tall trees and bristled bushes around the sides of the road, interspersed by some more wooden kiosks that all seemed to deal in fruits and drinks of various kinds, watched over by colorfully dressed and chatty women. "Is this restaurant something like one of these things?" I asked. "No, look, it's there," Mohammed answered, and pointed to a modern, well-lit concrete building that suddenly appeared on the side of the road. It was a strange anomaly in the otherwise primordial scenery of nature. It had an asphalt driveway, glass doors, steel supports, and a large open terrace with plastic garden chairs and tables that were occupied by a good number of patrons. Right next to this comfortable-looking terrace was a roof-covered kitchen shack, where an apron-sporting man was operating a large open-fire barbecue. We drove up right next to the restaurant and piled out of the car in a sweaty jumble, relieved to stretch ourselves once again after traveling for more than 5 hours already in that cramped space. "Let's get some food here," Mohammed proposed, while I walked behind him, exchanging nods with the clientele, who glanced over us before resuming their conversation or to watch a football match that was being broadcast from a large television screen. We greeted the chef, who was rigorously frying small pieces of red meat on a large metal plate above the open fire. There was an old wooden table next to him with a large bucket of mayonnaise, another one filled with fresh onions, and a third one with fresh red chili peppers. Above his head hung the skinned carrion of some headless animal from an iron hook. It was about the size of a large dog, but it had hooves instead of paws, to my relief. Its red flesh gleamed magically in the glare of the large fire, and drew a number of hungry flies around it. "What animal is that?" I asked, as we observed the man take the carcass down on the table in order to cut into it with a large meat cleaver, applying heavy, precise strikes to cut right through the bone, and then plying the resulting pieces on the hot plate to be fried with oil. The sizzle and smoke made my mouth water with expectation. "It's goat," my partner said, and paid the guy for 2 portions. "You never eat goat before?" "Only once, I think, in the south of Spain, among the mountains of Cadiz. Really great stuff." "Good," he said, while accepting 2 small plastic bags from the grill master. All the fried meat, chili, onions, and mayonnaise were stuffed inside them, wrapped inside lumps of brown paper. It was a far cry from the fancy dining plate from which I'd eaten my previous goat, but I didn't mind it, since the parcel smelled so delicious. "So," I asked as we approached that hellishly packed car of ours, "could I sit there by the window this time?" "Sure, man," Mohammed said, and pushed himself in the middle seat, without scruples. As the car started to roll onwards once again, we all dug into our bags of food. The goat meat was tough, but spicy and crispy, and I felt like I could have eaten 4 portions of them in one go. Once seated by the window, I was able to put my head out of it so as not to have to stay crouched up all the time. This also gave me the opportunity to properly survey the surreal, almost Jurassic scenery around us. Little by little, even the few shacks by the roadside disappeared, and there was nothing around us but dense, mysterious jungle that looked dangerous and yet irresistibly fascinating. By this time, the full moon was glaring in the cloudless sky, illuminating the palm trees and the massive undergrowth by the sides of the road. There was no other source of light to penetrate the darkness except the headlights of our car and those of other vehicles that we met once in a while on that snaking narrow dirt road. All my senses felt supercharged at that moment. The rough, spiky bushes were seething with a whole universe of life that chirped, croaked, and sang with lustful intensity. The smell of the green undergrowth was intoxicatingly sweet and heavy with moisture. Moreover, I felt jubilant at being finally able to sit up straight with my head leading out of the window, though I had to pull it back inside every time we got too close to a huge noisy truck that we overtook, or then some manic driver who roared past us. "Watch out, Fote!" the driver would shout at me over his shoulder. "Don't get yourself killed in there!" But I still couldn't help stretching my head out of the car to breathe in the exhilarating air whenever the road was empty. Luckily, most of the time we were completely alone roaming through that wilderness, and I was able to marvel at a deep green valley that began to emerge on our right side. Beyond this vast, largely uninhabited expanse of vegetation began to appear some enormous dark shapes that I initially thought were clouds. But soon I realized that they seemed somehow too physical to be just a mass of water vapor. "Is that a mountain?" I asked Mohammed, who was dozing on and off in that ridiculously uncomfortable position, resembling a cat trying to lick its own butt but not being able to do it so well. Of course, he grunted with fatigue. We have shit like that here everywhere. Good Lord, man! I shouted out of the window in a deliriously joyful pitch that made the other passengers grin and joke among themselves. Well now, see how the tourist boy likes our country. I could sense how proud these people were of their magical and yet ill-managed land, and they had all the reason to do so. Indeed, it was a mountain that rolled closer and closer as we drove alongside the valley's edge. But such a mountain I had never seen in my life before. It was a shockingly perpendicular one, so that it seemed to fall on top of our heads, even across a smoothly flowing black river. From it rose vast clouds of moisture that were illuminated by the moonlight, like bright rolling auras in the warm air. The tall, unevenly rising sides were covered thickly with undergrowth and gnarled trees that seemed completely impassable and uncharted. It was a mesmerizing monument of history, probably having stood its ground since the time of the dinosaurs and beyond. And as if by magic, I saw more of these leviathans beginning to appear slowly from the mist behind it, looking like a group of resting giants that were shifting around languidly. Adding to the dramatic effect, violent shrieks of mysterious mountain-dwelling animals carried all the way down to our scurrying little car, promising relentless opposition to any form of exploration. During my travels, I had seen the Alps and the mountains of Granada, climbed the Roman hill fortresses of Valencia, and explored the ancient temples of Egypt. But these green undulating monoliths appeared more majestic than anything I'd ever witnessed before. They seemed supernaturally alive in their immense, constantly shifting grandeur as we slowly made our way between them, making it easy to understand why the old tribes of the land still worshipped them as gods. Between them ran vast, pitch-black, violently foaming rivers that we rode over on terribly cracked cement bridges with no railings. Sometimes there was only an inch between us and the deep abyss below that turned my stomach as I stared into its shadows. "This place is like another planet," I hollered to Mohammed, who grumbled something incomprehensible, tossing in and out of slumber with his baseball cap dangling on the side of his head, sunglasses down his nose, and a bunch of little bananas bouncing on his lap. After this Jurassic Canyon was left behind us, along with the life-giving water streams, the terrain gradually began to resemble a dry savanna with large boulders, tinder-dry bushes, and red dust blowing in the wind. Our car started to climb up a barren hill that was dazzlingly alight and bustling with engine noise. There we passed one of the infamous mineral excavation sites that seemed to be running both day and night, with ancient rusty tractors and overburdened people toiling under blinding spotlights. The mineral-rich sand appeared to be dug up and piled into train carriages directly without any kind of intermediary phases, which probably meant that the material would be processed only upon arrival to their destined countries, China, Russia, or wherever. It was a disheartening sight, knowing that the vast natural wealth of this land was seeping into pockets whose owners would never give a thought about fixing even the dangerous roads we were jostling on, let alone build hospitals or schools. After all the loads would be exhausted, the culprits would quickly wash their hands and move on to their next prey, wherever on Earth or in outer space it might be found. My partner too woke up and expressed his indignation. "Look, those trains," he said, and pointed at rusty train carriages that were standing in a seemingly never-ending line next to us. Remember? I tell you, there are trains in Guinea. Yeah, I recalled with a nod. But no people use them, he concluded with a low voice, fearing spies among our fellow travelers. It's only for mineral. That's disgusting, I muttered, and watched as the old tractors kept pouring that valuable sand into the carriages to be appropriated unfairly, like ebony, diamonds, gold, and human bodies had been before. All the other passengers also gazed at that same monument of usurpation with the hapless look on their faces, unable to find any words to describe their sense of loss. For quite a while, all conversation died from within our car as the memory of what we had witnessed haunted us. Right after this ominous spot, we met a fenced roadblock that was surrounded by armed soldiers in uniforms. Or so I hoped they were, instead of being road bandits in disguise waiting for their prey. "What's this?" I asked nervously from my partner. "Nothing, just passport check. They want to protect that mineral place." "Of course," I grunted, and presented my visa along with my ID through the window to a young soldier, no older than 17, who sported an assault rifle on his shoulder like it was his badge of honor. This was the dark side of Guinea that I was witnessing now. It served as a bleak reminder that I was not entering paradise or hell, but a human world with many different sides to it, and one that should be approached with due caution. Not long after making our way past the checkpoint, my partner raised his voice in jubilation. "We are here, man! Kindia!" "Thank God," I said, and saw the first shabby cement buildings emerge by the sides of the road, which itself suddenly changed into a half-decent asphalt pavement beneath our wheels. The taxi pulled over next to a very modern and European-looking little gas station, and me and my partner, as well as a few others, got out with our belongings. The rest of the travelers, along with the driver, had a long way yet to go across the country to other cities. I privately wished them a safe journey as we watched the mangled, multicolored station wagon disappear back into the traffic. It was already late night, so there were only a few cars and pedestrians moving or lounging about, but to my luck, the station shop itself seemed to remain open around the clock. "Can I go see that shop?" I asked Mohammed, who was adjusting his heavy rucksack on his back. "Yeah, Rasta," he said, reading my mind. "You can get beer there. I go find taxi. The hotel is a bit far still." I walked into the shop and found it perfectly ordered, clean and air-conditioned like I'd stepped back into Europe all of a sudden. Even the clerk spoke perfect English to me as I bought a few beers and bottles of water. "You have beautiful tattoos," he said. "Are they part of your religion?" "Yes," I said, feeling a bit playful. "I'm a priest back home in Europe." "Really?" "Yeah," I said, and held up the beers. "And these are for my rituals." I returned back outside to find my partner shaking his head. "Nothing yet," he said. "It's so damn late." He led me next to the main road on the other side of the station, where there was a line of battered cars parked with their drivers sitting inside. After going through a few of them, he found a potential driver with whom he started a fierce haggle for prices, while I sat at the curb on a little brick wall and enjoyed my cold beer. "Okay," he finally bellowed. "Let's take this one." I grabbed our bags and carried them to the old hatchback car. Despite looking like it was ready for the scrapyard, it boasted an impressive sound system that boomed Afrobeats music with an almost deafening volume. The music itself was intricate and energizing, imbued with complex polyrhythms and highly technical vocal melodies that seemed to dance around the ether with constantly varying modulations. We drove up a dark hillside over an empty sand road in pitch-black darkness. In the glare of our headlights, I could see buildings and stone walls on our both sides, but they were all dark and dead silent at this time of night. My partner guided the taxi to the tall, green-painted front gate of our hotel that was protected by a 7-foot stone wall. We paid the fare and made our way through a small, unlocked metal door into a dark courtyard, at the end of which stood the reception building. But it too was unlit and quiet, so we just crept past it silently. My partner led me in the moonlight to a beautifully finished stone house away from the other buildings within the compound. It had sturdy glass windows with curtains and a neat brick-laid front yard, surrounded by a tall stone wall and bushes of greenery. There was even a large air conditioning unit protruding from the outer wall of the house. "Nice," I marveled as we made our way around the building. "This is our place, man," my partner said, and laid his bag on a tiled terrace that had beautiful stone pillars and comfortable-looking wicker chairs. "Go look inside. Here." He threw me the key, and I used it to open a metallic gate that was protecting the front door. Let's see," I said, stepping through the doorway and touching the light switch. What an improvement it was to our lodgings from the previous night. It had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a large living room with a dining table, television, lushy sofas, and carpets. I felt like a damn sultan. "Amazing," I said, while wandering through the rooms. "It's good, huh?" my partner shouted from the terrace. "They even have a microwave," I hollered back from the kitchen that also had a proper sink and a modern water tap. "And a fridge, man. This is perfect." Each of the bedrooms had a proper shower and a European toilet. Praise to Jah. I took immediate possession of this facility as my stomach was once again getting lively. In the shower room, I could hear crickets chirping lustily outside the window as I washed myself from the red dust that had coated my skin during the trip. Soon after, I fell on my very own double-sized bed. Now there was no longer fear of bumping into Mohammed's muscular back in the middle of the night. "God bless this country," I whispered out loud, feeling sorry that I had never in my life said that about Finland.